Recording for this will be posted on our website after Extension Master Gardener College. So give us 2 or 3 weeks. Stephanie will answer questions put into the chat, or you can save your questions until the end. Additionally, if there's a question that we can't answer right now, we need to maybe reference some material and get back to you with a complete answer. Ask that you send Stephanie or myself an email, and we'll work on that. And just be patient with us with responses. If there's some bigger questions and stuff, we do tend to put the link to reference material with the webinar on our webinar archive. So today is Thursday, May 29th. Our May webinar series is Pesticides and the Pest Management Puzzle. I will let Stephanie introduce herself and start presenting. Please put questions in the chat and we'll answer them as we can.
All right. Can everybody hear me? Hear me okay? Great. Thank you, Grace, for the introduction, and thank you for inviting me to come talk to you all about pesticides today and pest management. I have been with Virginia Tech pesticide programs for about 14 years. I have a background in horticulture and entomology. So this is, pest management is something that we get a lot of questions about, and we try to produce content about to help people understand it better. Our main job is pesticides, so we do safety. We talk about pesticide safety at our office. But we're going to go ahead and get started here. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to talk about a few things. I'm going to go over some examples of a few things that some people may consider pests or some people may not. We're going to talk about pest management decisions and using IPM. We're going to talk about how pesticides fit into IPM. And we're going to talk about using pesticides safely and some common misconceptions. So how do we define pests? Well, pests it's any organism that is damaging food, fibers, structures, or other materials that humans need or value. They can cause and spread disease. They may live or grow where they're not wanted. There are also things that cause general annoyance or anxiety. So I have some examples in the parentheses here. A lot of them are insect examples because I am an entomologist, but I have a few other examples as well. And we're going to look at a few things and think about, is this a pest or not? So in this example, I have dandelions. We have a few growing in some turf here. And you may be someone who just says, I don't mind a few. That's okay. They do have, early, they provide some early pollination for our pollinators. And, they are edible, so they're not all bad. But maybe you get to a point like this and your turf is just overrun with dandelions and you are just overwhelmed. And this can happen. So it kind of depends on how you feel about dandelions, of whether or not you think it's a pest. How about termites? So most people's first reaction might be, yeah, that's a pest. But actually, termites, they decompose dead trees in forest ecosystems, and that's a really important service that they provide when they're in that setting. But what happens if they get into our house and they start eating the house? Then you might get a little bit nervous about termites, and you're going to have to find a way to control it. I actually moved into a house a few years ago, and we did a termite inspection, and we found some, and we were pretty nervous about it, but we found out that the termites hadn't made it into into the joists, which was great news. And we were able to get a pest control company to help us out with the control. And then we had to fix some moisture issues around the home, and they have not returned, thankfully. What about deer? So some people, feel like, oh, they're so cute. Well, here they're kind of in a meadow near a forest. They're happy. What happens when they come into your yard and they eat all of your hostas and all of your tulips and all of your Asiatic lilies? Um, that can be, whoops, sorry about that. Sorry about that. Did I get it? Okay. So that can be really frustrating when they come into your yard and they're eating all of your landscaping. Um, but this is something that happens, and it depends on how you feel about deer. So I tried to use a few examples there: one insect, one weed pest, and a vertebrate pest. So if you think you have a pest problem, what do you do next? The first thing you need to do is to, make sure that it is a pest that's causing the problem. So you want to get a proper identity. This is really important because in order to control pests, we need to understand their biology. So if we don't have a proper identity, it's going to be really hard to control the pests because we won't have the right tools to interrupt their biology. So ways that you can identify pests: you can contact your local extension agent, and they should be able to help you. If they're having trouble with the pest identity, there are resources on the Virginia Tech campus that can help them. So we can get an answer for you. You can also look at the VCE Pest Management Guide. It has a lot about pests in there and identification. There are a lot of fact sheets that go over different pests and their identification also on the VCE website. Another way you can do this is there's apps that you can download on your Apple, on your Android, like iNaturalist or Seek by iNaturalist. You can just Google that, it'll pop right up. But these are very good identification apps if you want to try to identify some things on your own. And it will look at, it'll even just do, maybe you have a really pretty bird that you want to identify. It can help you identify any living organism around. So once you have a proper ID, it's time to make some decisions. And you want to consider integrated pest management strategies. And this is an ecological approach to controlling pests. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about the tactics in just a few minutes. Integrated pest management, it's meant to be holistic. It's not meant to eliminate pests. That's not the goal of IPM. It's meant to help you like control the populations and get them down to where it's a more suitable situation. So the first thing you want to do is start monitoring and assessing. So, go out in your garden or around your house. You really want to look closely at what's going on. Identify the pest, identify other things, other plants, other animals, other insects. I mean, it's good to know everything that's kind of around in your garden or around the house. So where's the pest located? That's going to be important. Is it like sticking to a specific plant? How large is the population? So is it like really high population of pests, or is it kind of low? Um, and that will help you determine later if you need to take action. And how bad is the damage? Is it something you can live with, or is it just getting so bad that you've got to take action? And so then you decide at what point should you use the pest control tactics. And then after you use these tactics, you need to determine how effective they were so that later on, if you encounter the problem again, you can try the tactics again if they were effective. And if not, you can try to find some other ways to control the pest. I do want to talk just quickly about a couple misconceptions about IPM. So one myth is that IPM means chemical free, and that's not true. IPM does include chemical controls. So with an IPM program, you're trying to combine your non-chemical and your chemical controls to regulate the pest. And we'll go through that a little bit more soon. And I've heard this one before, people using IPM and organic synonymously, but these terms are not the same. They don't mean the same. IPM, IPM and organic, they have similar non-chemical controls, but the chemical control is different. So both IPM and organic incorporate pesticides. However, in organic systems, you're not allowed to use the conventional or the synthetic pesticides. So, in an organic system, you're using types of pesticides that are naturally derived. And that's the biggest difference in the chemical controls between IPM and organic, but both systems can incorporate pesticides. And what about integrated pest management? So let's go through the different control tactics that we have. So you see, I've got these puzzle pieces. They're linking together. You've got biological control, cultural control, mechanical and physical, and chemical control. Also, real quickly, just want to talk about some preventative tactics. So you can use host plant resistance if the plant varieties or cultivars are available to use that are resistant or tolerant to pest damage, then try to get those and try to plant them because that's going to cut down on you having to worry about certain pest problems in your landscape. Some other preventative strategies, obviously, we want to select plants for the correct hardiness zone. And I do believe the USDA hardiness zones were recently updated. So it's a good idea to look that up, make sure you're getting the plants for the correct hardiness zone because you don't want to plant something that's just going to die. Sun exposure, you want to make sure they're in the proper place. So, don't plant shade plants in the sun. When I moved into my house, there were some hellebores that were in full sun. They were really unhappy. So I had to move them around to the other side of the house, and now they're doing a lot better. But sometimes people don't know that or understand that. You want to make sure you have some good soil, that's not compacted and that allows for good drainage. You can also think about things like cleaning and disinfecting tools, equipment, potting materials. For cleaning and disinfecting tools, one of the examples I can think of is boxwood blight. That's a big one. So if let's say at your house you have some older boxwoods planted, but you've also put in a couple of new ones. So you would want to be really careful about trimming the new ones and then going and trimming the old ones without disinfecting your tools because you could inadvertently be spreading boxwood blight. So now we're going to get into our tactics. Here I'm going to talk about biological control. And this is the use of living organisms like natural enemies to reduce pest populations. And there are lots of natural enemies out there, and they may already be doing some of this work in your garden, in your landscape to reduce these pests. So here's an example, the top picture, that is a ladybug larva. They look really different from the adult ladybug, but they are able to go around on your plants and eat aphids for you. So that's a nice service that they provide. Um, and down on the bottom here, I have a picture. You may or may have not seen this before. This is a tomato hornworm. It has been parasitized by this tiny little braconded wasp right there in the other picture. And what happens is the wasp will lay eggs into the hornworm's body. The eggs will hatch. They will kind of eat the insides of the hornworm, and then they will spin cocoons on the exterior of the body, and then they will hatch and they will go on and keep providing this service. So that's a really cool example. If you see a hornworm like that in your garden, just leave it alone. The parasite has already done the work for you, and it would be better just to let the parasitoids hatch and move on. And how about cultural control? So modifying the growing environment to reduce pest populations. And this can be things like mulching your beds around your house, making sure like your moisture is right, like not getting things, say you're watering plants, maybe making sure they're not too wet or too dry. The picture here, the bucket of water is just sitting there. And so if you leave that bucket of water for the whole summer, you're eventually going to have mosquitoes laying eggs in the water. They're going to hatch into larvae. They're going to complete their life cycle, and they're going to come in full force to bite you all summer. So try to eliminate those water sources, just laying around the house if you can. Mechanical and physical control. This is the use of hands-on techniques or simple devices and equipment to reduce pest populations. So in this photograph, I have someone simply pulling weeds out of the garden. And that can be an effective tactic if you not have too many that you have to pull, because it is labor intensive. It takes a long time. But yes, you can certainly pull weeds. Physical control is something like using little nets or screens as barriers to keep pests out. Having a fence maybe around your garden to keep vertebrate pests out, just things like that. That's mechanical and physical control. And then the last part of the puzzle is chemical control. And this involves the use of pesticides along with your non-chemical controls to help regulate the pest problem. It depends on the type of pest you have as to whether this is the best approach for controlling it, and the intended application site. So here you have your puzzle, and just bringing it all back into view. You have all these different options available to you to use for managing pests. And I do want to just give you a little IPM story. This is something that happened to me. I was living here in Blacksburg in a townhouse, and I had a fenced-in patio where I would like to grow. I typically like to grow some tomatoes, a few peppers, and some herbs. And I had this pot of jalapeno peppers. It's like they're so easy to grow in containers. And I was really excited because they had bloomed and my peppers were starting to grow. So I knew that meant, oh, I'm going to get to make jalapeno poppers soon. So, I'm watching the plant, watching the peppers, waiting for them to grow a little more before I pick them. And I started noticing that the peppers were just disappearing from the plant. And no one had picked them. They were just gone. And there was very little evidence of something eating on them. I thought, oh, maybe a large caterpillar started gnawing on them or something, but I couldn't find any evidence. So I kept watching it, trying to figure out what was happening. And one day, out of the corner of my eye, I saw something inside the fence. And it turned out it was a groundhog. And it had broken into the fence and was eating all of my jalapeno peppers. And I realized then and there that the best way for me to eliminate this problem was to check my fence. So I went around the fence, and sure enough, there was a weak spot where it had dug under the fence, and that's how it was coming in. So once I fixed that problem, it never came back, and I was able to grow them once again. So that's just one example. IPM, I know it sounds complicated, but it can be very simple to implement. Okay, I do want to talk about pesticide safety. So let's say you're working on your pest problem and you've tried, a lot of different tactics and it's just not working out for you and you're thinking about using a pesticide. Well, if you decide to go that route, I want to go over some safety. This is just some reminders. I'm not going to go too in depth because we would be here all day. But let's go ahead and talk about pesticides. So you have different types of pesticides. These are just a handful that I can think of that you might be more familiar with. There's obviously a lot more types out there. You have your insecticides, herbicides, and fungicides. Your herbicides are the most used worldwide, um, followed by insecticides and then fungicides. Now, that being said, I'm sure during 2020, your disinfectants and antimicrobials were used very heavily. So they may have topped that list during 2020. Um, You also have, miticides to control mites. There are rodenticides on the market, although you may not see quite as many of those as you used to available because they are kind of cracking down a little bit on the rodenticides to protect non-target species. So there's still products out there, but just fewer of them. Um, and and you have your repellents, to help repel pests. And so, what is a pesticide formulation? Um, Pesticides are formulated, and it's to help help the person who's going to be applying to help the end user um, actually apply it because it's been formulated with a mixture of active and inert ingredients um, that just makes it a little safer, easier to use. Some are sold as ready to use products, and some require mixing before use. So here's some examples of pesticides that require mixing before use. You will definitely see liquid concentrates in your local garden centers. You may see emulsifiable concentrates or wettable powders from time to time too. Um, and then you have a lot of products that are considered ready to use. So your liquid solutions, they're usually sold in the applicator itself, like in the spray bottle. You have aerosols, baits, dust, granules, and pellets. So these are just some examples of things you might run into in the local garden center that are considered ready to use. So let's talk. I do want to talk about the pesticide label because this is a really important piece of information if you are thinking about using a pesticide. Your label can be directly printed on the product container like you see on the left, or it can be attached to the container as a leaflet like you see on the right. That's very common. We try to drive home this point that you really need to read the label before you purchase the pesticide, use it, store it, or dispose of the pesticide in its container. It's really, really important that you take time in the store to read the label before you purchase it. And there's reasons why, because you want to make sure that the pests that you're trying to control and the intended application site are actually listed on that label. If they're not, you need to keep searching for a product that would be better suited to what you're trying to control. And you always need to read the label before using a pesticide, not just the first time, but if there's a product that you say you do use it, um, every year, every other year, you need to read that label because labels change. So if you go back and you buy another bottle, the label could be different. So it's important to just look through it, brush up on it, make sure, that you're aware that if there's been any changes. And pesticides may not be applied to any plant, animal, or site that's not listed on the product label. This is non-negotiable. It's part of the label. It's considered the law. So you want to make sure your plant, animal, or site is listed on that label. You also cannot apply them at higher rates, meaning you cannot increase the dosage that it recommends, or more frequently than the label directs. So some labels will have specific instructions like you can only apply this 3 times in one season, or you have to wait like 14 days before you can apply this again. Um, so that's really important. You really need to follow the dosage and the frequency. Also, you don't want to apply pesticides at rates lower, so lower dosages than listed on the label. If you are going to use something, you need to use the recommended dose because applying at a lower rate can lead to pests gaining resistance to pesticides. And then they will reproduce, and their offspring will also have those resistance traits. So just please follow the recommended rates. I do want to mention restricted use pesticides versus general use. So restricted pesticides are meant for certified applicators only, and you will not see these like in your local garden center. These you have to have a license through the state of Virginia to even purchase these products. Otherwise, what you're going to see is general use pesticides. They're usually less hazardous to work with. They're often pre-mixed, and you don't have to have a license to purchase or apply them. That being said, I do want to show you some examples of some general use products that they have labels that have special statements on them. So if you look closely there, it says not for use on home lawns. And then the next one says for agriculture or commercial use only. So these products are intended for professionals. They're not restricted, but they're intended for pest management professionals. And if you see a statement like that on something you're looking at the store, I would not recommend purchasing that. Just, keep looking around the store and try to find something else. So for your parts of the label, let's just go through these real quick. You have a brand name. You see the manufacturer. In this case, it's Ortho. The brand name is very creative: flower, fruit, and vegetable insect killer. But yeah, this is the type of stuff that you will see in your local garden center. The ingredient statement lists the amount of active ingredients, so the pesticide, and the inert ingredients, the other additives that are in the container. And we'll talk a little bit more soon about active and inert ingredients. Oh, right now we're going to talk about it. So, active ingredients are chemicals in the pesticide that affect or control the target pest. The inert ingredients are additives. They're diluting the pesticide. It's making it safer for the end user, or it can aid in the effectiveness of the pesticide. Um, Inert ingredients are not listed line by line. They are considered trade secrets of the manufacturer. So you're not going to see that. Your active ingredients, um, you could have, there could be one active ingredient or two or three, and they're going to be listed in, according to their percentage in that bottle. You're also going to have this statement: keep out of reach of children and I like to say and pets. They don't put that on the container, but you don't want your furry friends getting into products. You also have a signal word on this product. It's caution, and this is just telling you about the product's relative acute toxicity. And also, you have a net content statement down at the bottom. It may tell you how much product is in the container, whether it's fluid ounces or pounds, but it will tell you how much product is in there. A signal word. So let's talk about these signal words. Again, it's telling you the relative acute toxicity to humans and other mammals. So this is like a short-term exposure. Um, the the signal word is not telling you about chronic exposure. It's telling you about short-term exposure. And so you have different signal words. It can be low, like caution. Warning is moderate. Danger is high. There's also a danger poison with skull and crossbones. It's very high acute toxicity, but you're not going to see that on general use products. That sometimes appears on restricted use products. And I can show you a few examples of some general use products. So here is one that I found, and it actually has the danger signal word. And let me tell you, I had to dig hard to find this example because a lot of the stuff you see in the garden centers, it will not have the danger signal word. So um, yeah, it was very hard to find that example. Here's an example of warning. You will see this occasionally, but you probably won't run into it that often. What you're mostly going to see is caution. That's what's usually on most of the products at your local garden center. So continuing on with parts of the label, you have a directions for use section, and this is really what you're wanting to read pretty uh, read it well before you purchase it, because it's going to tell you the pests that the products can control. It's going to tell you the intended application site. So based on those two things, maybe the product may not work for you. You may need to look for something else. It'll also tell you how to handle, mix, load, and apply the product. It will tell you the application rate, like we talked about, the dosage, and how often, the frequency that it can be used. And it will list if you have to have any necessary application equipment. So, it may be that you see some application equipment on there that you don't already own, and maybe you don't want to make that investment. So just read about that. You don't want to get the product home and then realize you have to buy another sprayer or something to spray it. It also has information about storage and disposal. So you will see statements on there, like in the example, it says like keep from freezing. Um, you don't want products to freeze. You don't want them to get too hot. This can degrade them and make them less effective. You also don't want them to freeze because they can bust. The container can bust, and then you end up with a spill. So just make sure that you have a place where you can store these products properly. We will talk more about that a little bit later on. And it will talk about pesticide disposal, which I will cover a little bit more later. Precautionary statements. So this is telling you the hazards to human and domestic animals and how to reduce exposure to the hazards. Um, and well, I'll talk a little bit more about how to reduce your exposure in just a little bit. First aid. So this is the recommended treatments for accidental exposure or poisoning, and it's nice because they kind of tell you if it's on your skin, if it's inhaled, if it's swallowed, and this is the protocol that you should take to respond to that. You can also call if you're worried about an accidental exposure, maybe you're not sure what happened. You can call the Poison Control Center, and I can get that number for Grace. Maybe we can send it out after the talk. I'll probably send you a list of resources, but you can call it. It's a national hotline, and it will route you to the local, like the nearest poison control center, and they can help talk you through what you need to do to respond. Environmental hazards. This is really important too. You want to read this before you purchase a product. It tells you how to protect non-target species and the environment. So it may be that some products are, they may be hazardous to fish or hazardous to birds or hazardous to bees, or that you can't allow the product to run off or enter surface water. So it's really important to read those and just make sure that if you're going to apply something that you're not going to impact your non-targets in the environment. Physical or chemical hazards. This tells you about specific fire or explosive or chemical hazards that the product may pose. So in this one, I believe it says do not apply this product to, I can't quite see it there, but in or on electrical equipment due to the possibility of shock hazard. So that's a specific one for this product. And then on these labels, you're going to have an EPA registration number. So this means that the product the product label, it's been approved and it's registered with the Environmental Protection Agency. Also, though, in Virginia, products have to be registered with our Virginia Department of Ag, with the Office of Pesticide Services. So we try to tell people to, it is just better to go to your local garden center when you're trying to select something. If you're purchasing online, there's a possibility that it may not actually be registered in the state. And then if you use it, you're kind of breaking the law. So we we just encourage people to, yeah, go to your local garden center. They are going to have the products that are registered for our state. There's also under that registration number an EPA establishment number, and this is telling you where the product was produced by the manufacturer. And would be important in case, something wasn't quite right about the product. Maybe there was a defect or it didn't work the way it was supposed to. And then you could call the manufacturer. They're going to ask you for those establishment numbers so they can look into those batches to see if anyone else has reported problems as well. Okay, now we're going to talk a little bit about exposure. There are 4 routes of exposure. You can be exposed through your skin, through your eyes. You can accidentally inhale a product or accidentally ingest a product. And so, how do we protect ourselves if we are using a pesticide? You can minimize your exposure. One way to do that is to select the ready to use products. Um, that's because if you are having to mix something, you are, having to do more handling with the product, and there's more of a chance that you might accidentally spill it or something. So you can use ready to use products. Also, wearing personal protective equipment can help minimize exposure. And this is the clothing and devices that applicators wear to protect themselves while working with pesticides. It is minimal for general use products, and they may not go into great detail about it on the label. So I wanted to just tell you what you should always do. If you're applying anything, you need to be wearing long pants, a long sleeve shirt, socks, and closed-toed shoes. Again, the label will specify. It will tell you if something else is needed beyond that. I do like to recommend, though, it's never a bad idea to invest in a nice pair of gloves. And gloves, because you're using your hands to work with these chemicals, they can reduce your exposure up to 99%. It's not your regular gardening glove. Nothing with cloth, nothing with leather. These are chemical resistant. They are made from materials like neoprene, butyl, or nitrile rubber. They also don't have any kind of lining. Some gloves, if you buy them, they may have like some fabric or something on the inside, and that is not the correct glove to buy. It may look like rubber, chemical resistant on the outside, but on the inside, if it has the cloth, you don't want to use that. If you accidentally spill something and it runs down your glove, the fabric will absorb it and it'll just keep holding it on your skin, and you could have a reaction. Also, I do want to mention, try not to, don't wear leather when you're applying pesticides. Leather gloves, leather boots, these things, if you spill a pesticide on that leather, you cannot remove it. It won't come out. So don't wear things like that if you're applying something. And just a quick reminder about cleaning your PPE, your protective clothing. You want to wash them separate from other clothing in the house. You also want to keep them separate from your family laundry. Don't go out and apply something and then throw it in the family hamper. You need to keep them separate. Um, Use hot water and detergent. Run a full load. Also, if you can wash them right after you've been working with pesticides, that's better than letting it sit there, because sometimes the chemicals can bind more tightly to the fabric. So if you wash them sooner rather than later, it will remove more residues. line dry them outside on a sunny day, and that's because sunlight can help break down any leftover residues as well. And then after you're done, run a hot water cycle with detergent in your empty washer, and that will help remove any residues that might be in the washer. And there was a recent study that came out a few years ago, and they actually found that this is very effective in removing any residues from your washer drum. So let's talk quickly about storage. You need to choose a location that protects people, animals, and the environment. Like I said before, you don't want the chemicals to endure temperature extremes or excess moisture. And a well-ventilated locked cabinet would be best. Always, always keep your pesticides out of the reach of children and pets. This will help prevent accidental poisonings. Never keep pesticides in cabinets with food or animal feed. That's a big no-no. You want to separate them. Um, you don't want to, sometimes pesticides, the way they're formulated, they can look similar to like other animal or feed or things. And so you don't want to accidentally use the wrong thing in the wrong place. So keep them separate. Also help you avoid cross-contamination. Store your pesticides in their original containers. This is really important. Do not transfer pesticides to pop bottles or tea bottles. And the reason why is because some pesticides are very similar in color to things like Coca-Cola or iced tea. And so if you transfer it and then someone picks it up because they don't know what it is, they can accidentally drink it. So keep it in its original container. Don't store them in areas that are prone to flooding. Obviously, we've had some kind of extreme flooding events across the country. We've had them here in Virginia. So people may be having to reassess this a little bit because areas that haven't flooded before have flooded now. So just try to really keep them away from anywhere you think they could flood or get wet. Keep them away from living areas and ignition sources, and don't store large quantities of pesticides. And we'll talk about that a little more in a second. So here are some examples of storage. In your photo on the left, this is not really considered safe storage. So you can see there are some bottles down on the ground. They're just being left for anyone to touch. That's not good. The sprayer is sitting right next to it, and who knows if it has been cleaned out properly. This is just not a good example of storage. Also, there's a grill there. You don't really want that near your pesticides. And there's a sink in the background. So if the sink were to leak and get some of your pesticides wet, that could end up just a really big mess. So in the picture on the right, you have a storage cabinet. This is designed for pesticides. And you can see that they have been separated. So the liquid pesticides are in the bottom and the dry ones are on top. So if, let's say you have your pesticides all mixed up and a liquid one, it leaks, it can leak down onto your dry pesticide and it could have a chemical reaction. So we do recommend that too, just trying to keep the different types of products separate from each other. So again, avoid storing large quantities of pesticides. And the reason for this is because if you don't actually get to use them, then you just end up with a disposal problem on your hands. So only buy what you need for the season and don't stockpile them. Don't mix more than you need for a job. Um, that's really important. If you, let's say you do have a little bit left in your sprayer tank, um, consider using it, the excess, on a different treatment site that's listed on the label to get it out of that sprayer. You also don't want to store your sprayer with pesticides in there. It's just it's messy, and you don't want to deal with that later. So if you mix a little bit more by accident, go ahead and try to use it on another intended application site. Okay, never pour excess pesticides down any drain, including storm drains. Don't pour them down there. Don't burn, bury, or dump excess pesticides. You never want to reuse a pesticide container for any other purpose. That's a big no-no. And look at your label for directions on container disposal. Now, I know sometimes that's not super clear. It's not entirely clear. So, if you have some stuff that you need to get rid of, try to contact your local extension agent and work with them. There is a program that is run through our Virginia Department of Ag, through the Office of Pesticide Services, and it's called the Pesticide Collection Program. And it runs through the state. Um, every 5 years, they're in a different area. So last year, they were actually here in Southwest Virginia, but this year they're going to be down in the southeastern part of the state. And the local extension agents, the agents, actually work with someone at the Office of Pesticide Services. They set up sites, they collect the pesticides. So, let's say you move into this house and there's this old shed, and it is filled with chemicals that you don't want. You don't want to use them. You don't know what to do with them. Talk to your extension agent, and they can try to get you into this program. Otherwise, there is, so I don't have them listed here, but some localities across the state also do their own collection programs. It's usually called a household hazardous waste day. We've already had one, I believe, here. I believe the one for Blacksburg was already done. But they do them at different times of year, so you can um, go on your local government website and see if they offer a program. So if you need to select a pesticide, again, make sure the site and the pest are listed on the label. Consider that application equipment. It may not be something that you want to invest in, and that's okay. You can most likely find something that's ready to use. Try to minimize waste. Try not to mix too much. Don't keep too much on hand. Um, it really will, if you're using something, it'll one small bottle of it will probably take you a lot further than you think it will. Um, Consider the toxicity of the product. So look at those signal words. Um, just keep in mind what they're saying. So that is it caution, warning, danger. Just take a look at that before you purchase it. Consider your environmental hazards. Again, the risks to pollinators, to fish, to birds, to water. You need to take that into consideration, and take note of your storage and disposal that's listed on that container. So back to our puzzle pieces here. There's a lot of different ways that you can control pests, and you can use these different methods. It may only take one or two of these, it may take all of them, but just getting a proper ID on that pest, learning about the biology, learning about what else exists in your garden learning about the natural enemies that are already there helping you out, that's important too. So just keep in mind there's different ways to approach these pest problems. And that's all I have for you right now. I appreciate you listening. Um, and if you have any questions, I will do my best to answer them. And
Awesome.
I'll,
Thank you so much, Stephanie.
yeah.
We've got a couple of questions in the chat, but I wanted to ask one. A lot of you know that I was an Ag and Natural Resources Extension agent in Nelson County in Central Virginia for a while. And so I taught pesticide safety to producers and to my extension master gardeners. And a lot of times the volunteers were like, "So why do I need to know this?" Right? Because we had a pretty robust help desk program in Nelson to deal with backyard and consumer questions. There are a lot of the calls that come to the help desk could be like, "Well, what can I spray for this?" Right? And we want to make sure that our volunteers are prepared to answer and consider all of these things in the context of helping clients that come to the extension office. And also for our own knowledge, safe use of pesticides and intelligent use of IPM in our demonstration gardens and our like school garden projects and all of those things. So we talked a little bit about misconceptions with IPM, about the organic, does IPM mean it's organic? One of the questions that I got, or the misconceptions that we experienced a lot in local offices, is that no spray and organic are synonymous, and they're not.
That's
Um, and that organic is somehow better. It's different. It's somehow better. And we're going to have a whole nother talk in the future, guys, about organics and organic control and what that really means. Um, but I was hoping, Stephanie, you could answer some questions or maybe compare and contrast some things with organic and like USDA certified organic and kind of in context of what tools we have in our toolkit and for the home gardener.
Mhm.
And then I'll have a couple of other questions too. This is definitely something that I want to make sure we talk about and discuss because a lot of our volunteers and a lot of people in general socially are leaning towards organic and making organic purchases without a lot of good information about what that actually means, especially in the context of pesticide application.
Mhm. Yeah, so like you said, organic does not mean chemical free. Pesticides are allowed to be used in organic systems. And when people are uh, doing organics professionally, they have to follow the set of guidelines from the USDA. And so they are using non-chemical controls, but they are allowed to use a chemical control if they need to within their organic system. Now, the product has to be um, like approved by the USDA for organic use. Um, and that's how they do it within those systems. If you're trying to use things like that at home, I have seen and noticed some more of those products um, popping up in garden centers. I feel like there's more of them available than there used to be, and they will say on the front panel of the label, intended for organic gardening. But I do want to say that, if you are looking at these products, just because they are approved for organic does not necessarily mean that they are less toxic. So pay attention to those signal words um, because some organic products can actually be more toxic than these synthetic products. So I would really encourage you to look at those signal words. Um, like we said before, caution is the lowest, and then warning, danger. Uh, I don't know if that helps or
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, okay.
That's and then I wanted to ask we about home remedies too. So we get a lot of, and as all of our extension master gardeners know, and they've been trained, they may only make pesticide recommendations in line with the home grounds and animals PMG that we release every year through extension. And I always told my EMGs that's you send them the link to the document and the note of the page and say this is the recommendation and you help explain it, right? We're only allowed to make those recommendations for chemical recommendations. And there's more than just chemical recommendations in that guide. There's lots
Yeah,
of cultural recommendations there as well.
yeah.
But can you talk a little bit about home remedies? And the ones that come to mind are like vinegar, dish soap, um, Epsom salts and things like that, and mixing your own pesticides in the context of safety for us, safety for the environment, efficacy and things like that. Because I know that there's lots of different stuff, different information on the internet, and it's the issue that we have within an extension is not necessary. This is for everybody. It's not necessarily that um, it's not in the PMG, is that it's not tested and proven to be safe, and lots of other things. So can you talk a little bit about like home remedy pesticides and why we can't use those and why we can't recommend those?
Right, right. Okay, let me try to, yeah, give you a general gist here. So, okay, in the PMG, like Grace was saying, there are these chemical control recommendations. And I realized that there are a lot of them in there. And the reason that they're there is because the specialists that we have across the state have tested these products in research, and they have proven to be effective against certain pests. So um, that's why we want you to follow that, is because the specialists are the ones who are updating these sections. It's usually updated every year. Sometimes it might be every other year, depending on people's demands on time. But they're the ones putting the recommendations in there for those chemical controls. Now, I do know that they are trying to work on adding more of the non-chemical control methods too. So, you may not see it right away, but we are trying to work on that document and get more recommendations in there. Um, as far as home remedies, we actually have a pub on this, and I can share that with Grace if you'd like to take a look at it. Um, so, the home remedies, they have not gone through testing to see, you know, how effective they are at controlling pests. They also may not have the efficacy of your conventional products, meaning that you would have to um, reapply them several times to potentially get control. But you're also kind of risking some environmental hazards because we don't know if we're applying these, we don't know how they break down in the environment. So you are risking, um, hazards to your non-target organisms. So we don't really recommend, we don't recommend the home remedies. I do have that fact sheet that I can share with Grace on it. And it'll give you a little bit more information about those. Yeah, and you have access to the general use products at the garden center. And like I said, um, if you're worried about using the conventional or synthetic, more of the organic options are becoming available. Does that help?
Yeah, that's
Okay.
good. I also will make sure we link that myth busting for homemade pesticides publication in our show notes, but also um I linked it in the chat And so we'll do that. And also we had gotten some questions in the chat about
Okay.
the policies for pesticide applications for volunteers. That's not something that we're prepared to discuss today, but we do have a policy about how volunteers, master gardeners, master naturalists can utilize pesticides. And I will link that in the show notes. And if you've got questions about that, you can address that to
Yeah.
myself.
We did recently update that policy, so I can make sure that you have, if you don't, I'm sure you do have it, but the most up-to-date version. Yeah. There was
Yeah.
some law changes that came down from the House, and we had to make some changes to the policy.
Yeah. Yeah. And I want to make sure everybody's aware of that because there is a policy that governs what you guys can and can't use in your activities. If you've got questions about that, ask myself, ask Ed. It's on the EMG intranet. I've shared it before. I'll also link it in the show notes.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was a really interesting question in the chat, and it's not something that I've considered because I've always been on a septic system. But
Mhm.
one of the questions we got was about washing pesticide contaminated clothes in your washing machine when it discharges to public sewers, and safety of that. And I know a lot of things get deactivated when we wash them, but some stuff might not. And is there a public health or safety issue related to where our wash water from washing our pesticide clothes goes? And are there
Okay.
any kind of legal things related to that?
That that's a really good question. I didn't go into depth in the laundering. I actually have an entire presentation on it. But so if you are working with something and let's say you spill it really bad and your clothes are completely saturated, we do not recommend washing them. You don't even want to try. You just need to um, put those clothing in a heavy duty like trash bag, and they need to be disposed of because you most likely won't be able to get it out. So if you're doing normal, you're doing sprays and everything goes normally, um, you don't have any spills or anything like that, that is okay to wash in your machine. The levels would be just so low that I don't think it would cause a problem. I haven't gotten this question before. I mean, I can try to look into it a little bit more. Um, but yeah, I can see if I can find any other information about it as far as going into public waste.
Yeah, I think also it depends on where your washing machine discharges to. And as somebody who does apply pesticides in agricultural contexts, um, we are super, super careful if there's a large amount of pesticide on our clothing. It's either on a disposable thing that we intend to remove and throw away to begin with, or or that clothing item is something we just get rid of.
Yeah.
So the volume that you're putting into the environment is low from your washing machine. And I've definitely thrown away clothing articles
Yeah.
after spills and things like that.
Also,
I I never thought about like washing machines going out in gray water, having lots of maybe herbicides and then causing a problem. But I think we get around that by not washing things with large volumes of
right.
pesticide on it.
The other thing that you should do is when you're washing, you don't want to add too many items to your load. All of our washers now, a lot of them are high efficiency, so they don't use as much water. So, washing just, I would say 4, 5 items at a time on your large load with all that water, that's going to really help dilute it all too. And it will
As
clean better.
Dave said, that's something I remember from an environmental science class too, said the solution to pollution is dilution. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, so um we have some comments about specific pest issues and like organic solutions not necessarily working. And I want to tell a story and get you guys from a state extension master gardener and previous extension agent perspective. I want to hear one of my garden woes. I I love basil and I am terrible at growing basil. We've also, if you've been in Southwest Virginia, it's been rainy and cool in late May, and it was a relatively wet spring, and basil just doesn't like that. Um and I planted three different varieties of basil. I started one from seed. I bought plants from a nursery with another variety, and I had a plant that I bought from the ones in the herb section at the grocery store. And I put them all out in the same conditions. And the performance is dramatically different. And I don't have the inclination or the time to spray my garden if there's not a big problem. We're not using it for subsistence, so I'm not really worried about crop loss. I really do like fresh basil though, right? So I have these plants that I bought from the grocery store, which, as we all know, are probably not designed to really be outside. But I had them already, right? So I wanted to put them outside, and they are in horrible shape. They are yellow. They have shot holes all over them. They haven't grown any. They look terrible. Um, and then I have a 4-pack that I planted that I bought from a nursery. And they're good. They haven't really grown very much. They're a little yellow. I don't think they're liking the wet weather. And then I have what I started from seed, which did not did not go well. They look a little rough. They have some insect damage. But I wanted to talk about varieties and with you guys because it's all basil, right? But the stuff that I planted from indoors doesn't seem to have a um it doesn't seem to be performing very well. I don't think it was designed to go outside. And and that's really, really disappointing. And then um I was like, oh, well, what's causing the problem? And I can't find any insect pests on it. I don't know what's going on. It might be a disease problem. And and I was looked into what I had in the pesticide cabinet at home to decide, like, do I want to spray? And I was like, no, I don't think I want to spray. I think I'm gonna let it go because I don't want to have to wash my basil in order to feel like comfortable eating it. And I don't want to take the time to mix an insecticide for this if it is an insect problem. And I think I might just let the plant go, right? It's not my livelihood, right? And so all of those things go into your pest management decision. And so I decided not to spray, right? And I was like, I guess the basil is not going to go well. It's not going to grow well this year. I guess I'm just a little bit unlucky. I'll go to the farmer's market. It'll be okay. And then my husband walks outside the other day and he goes, you should really spray those basil plants. And I'm like, so I have an entire conversation with him, just like I would have with a client at the help desk about, well, I don't really think that we're going to. It doesn't make sense in the context of that pest management puzzle. So Diane's comment in the chat about like spittle bugs and things that are that are not working for her. Pest control is not working for her. Sometimes it just doesn't work, and sometimes it's just not worth it, and that is okay. And the sooner we all realize that, and the better we can help everybody else who's not on the call, because sometimes you just gotta let it go, right? There was another comment in there also in Diane's about um, natural enemies. This is a question we got in the EMG help desk a lot in Nelson, is people wanted to buy natural enemies and release them in their garden. As we've seen in the chat, and some of you might already know, they just leave, right? If you're not in a controlled environment area and you buy 1,000 ladybugs, they're gonna go away. They're gonna go fly and do something. They're gonna go to the neighbor's yard. They're gonna go explore something else. It's not effective outside. One of the things that you can do is just reducing how often you spray and the spectrum of the insecticides that you spray to kind of what we call conserve the natural enemies. So
Yeah.
something that that we talk about a lot, but it's just making sure that there's part of your yard that you don't put insecticide down on, where the predators can live safely and then go eat the bugs in your garden. So and all of that stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, you can definitely have just no spray zones. That's common. People do that a lot.
Yeah, we do it in conventional ag a lot too,
Mhm.
and just
Yeah.
having a conservation spaces that we don't spray, sometimes don't mow and things like that, or
Yeah.
mow less frequently.
Yeah, if
Um,
you're purchasing and releasing natural enemies, like you said, they can just go wherever they want. And if you don't have a pest population that's large enough to keep them there, they're not gonna stay. So, um, yeah, I would say, like what you were saying, Grace, just more like try to encourage some of the natural enemies to come in on their own.
yeah, yeah, to encourage them to come and stay, and then encourage the biodiversity of stuff, and then also don't um what I see the most of in my vegetable garden is really birds. And they're eating bugs.
Mhm.
They're not. I don't have any fruit on my vegetable plants right yet, right? There's no tomatoes for them to peck at. They do occasionally eat some strawberries, but they don't. They're eating the bugs, and I have to assume that the bugs that they're eating are probably eating my plants. So
Yeah.
and also chickens. Chickens are great. If you have chickens, feeding them, picking your hornworms off your tomatoes and feeding them to the chickens, there's nothing more satisfying. So um,
Another great example of biological control.
yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. Diane says buy ladybugs and release them in your neighbor's yard so they come back to your yard. That's there is in context of this, there's lots of really cool research going on in the entomology department, of plant pathology and things here at Tech about how bugs disperse in the landscape, especially in context of vegetable things. So um if you're really, really interested or really, really geeked out about something, definitely reach out to me or Stephanie. We can put you in touch with the specialist that is working on things like that. Um, and good luck. Um, I really appreciate all the work that you guys do in answering questions for the rest of the state and providing support. And if you've got specific pesticide, safety, integrated pest management questions. If you're looking for resources, especially if you're hosting a plant clinic or something like that, reach out to me or to Stephanie for resources or to get questions answered. And we'll link some other stuff in the chat.
Yeah, that's what we're here for.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much for joining. This recording will be posted in about 2 weeks or 3 weeks. And thank you so much for Stephanie for speaking for us, and everybody give Stephanie a big round of applause before we leave. Say thank you. Um, all right, guys, thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to stop recording now, and I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your week.
Thank you.